The warning lights filled the small cockpit with red as Daniel Carter fought with the controls of his survey ship. Every system was failing at once, and he could do nothing to stop it. The navigation computer had sent him into an uncharted region of space, and now the engine was dying. He looked through the viewport and saw a green and brown planet growing larger with every passing second. He tried to send a distress signal, but the communication array was already dead. The ship shook violently as it entered the atmosphere, and Daniel held on as flames surrounded the hull. He had survived many dangerous situations in his 5 years as a survey pilot, but this felt different. This felt final. The ship crashed into a field of tall purple crops, cutting a long path through the vegetation before finally stopping against a hill. Daniel hung in his seat, blood running down his face from a cut on his forehead. His left arm was broken, and breathing hurt in a way that told him his ribs were damaged too. He managed to release his harness and fell to the floor of the tilted cockpit. He crawled out through a hole in the hull and collapsed on the soft ground. The sky above was pale orange, and the air smelled sweet like flowers. He had no idea where he was, but he knew he was far from any human colony. His emergency beacon was damaged, and even if he could repair it, the signal might never reach anyone. Daniel closed his eyes and prepared to die alone on this strange world. He woke to the sound of voices speaking a language he did not understand. When he opened his eyes, he saw creatures standing around him. They were tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. They had 4 arms and wore simple clothing made from plant fibers. They looked afraid of him, and some held farming tools as if ready to defend themselves. One of them stepped forward. This one was older than the others, with lines on his face and a calm expression in his eyes. He spoke softly to the others, and though Daniel could not understand the words, the tone was clear. He was telling them not to be afraid. The old one knelt beside Daniel and examined his wounds. He touched the broken arm gently and made a clicking sound with his mouth. Then he looked at Daniel and placed a hand on his own chest. He said, Daniel understood. He placed his good hand on his own chest and said his name. The old one repeated it slowly, then stood and gave orders to the others. They brought a stretcher made of wood and cloth and carefully lifted Daniel onto it. They carried him to a village of small round buildings made from dried mud and grass. The creatures watched from doorways and windows as Daniel was brought to a larger building in the center. Inside, a younger one with gentle hands began treating his wounds. She cleaned the cut on his head and wrapped his broken arm in a splint made from wood and soft leaves. Over the following days, Daniel learned that he had crashed on a world called, and these creatures called themselves the. They were farmers and craftspeople who had only basic space technology. They had seen ships in the sky before, but no one from the stars had ever visited their village. Daniel was the first alien most of them had ever seen. Visited Daniel every day. The old one was the elder of the village, responsible for making decisions and keeping peace. Through simple gestures and repeated words, they slowly built a basic language between them. Daniel learned that the healer was named, and she was dedicated to making him healthy again. They brought Daniel food and water. They brought him blankets when the nights grew cold. They asked nothing in return and expected nothing. They simply helped him because he needed help. As weeks passed, Daniel grew stronger. His arm healed and his ribs no longer hurt when he breathed. He spent his time learning the language and teaching them about humans. He told them about Earth, about the oceans and mountains, about cities filled with millions of people. They listened with wonder, their large eyes wide with curiosity. But Daniel also learned difficult truths about his hosts. They had no military and no weapons beyond simple farming tools. They were considered unimportant by the greater powers of the galaxy. Pirates raided their world regularly, taking food and supplies and sometimes taking as slaves. The galaxy was dangerous, and they had no one to protect them. Daniel felt anger at this injustice. These kind and gentle people deserved better than to live in fear. He promised himself that if he ever returned to human space, he would not forget them. He spent many hours working on his emergency beacon. The main transmitter was destroyed, but he managed to build a weaker signal using parts from the wreckage. It would not reach far, but it was his only hope. One evening, sat with Daniel outside the healing house. The old elder looked at the stars above and spoke quietly. Daniel understood enough now to follow his words. Spoke of his people's history, of how they had once dreamed of exploring the stars but learned that the galaxy was cruel to the weak. He spoke of his hope that someday, someone would see the worth of the. Daniel placed his hand on shoulder. "I will not forget you," he said in the language. "I promise." Smiled sadly, as if he had heard such promises before. 3 months after his crash, a freighter passing through the system detected Daniel's weak signal. A shuttle came down to the planet, and the human crew was shocked to find one of their own living among aliens. They offered to take Daniel home immediately. Daniel said goodbye to the who had saved his life, gave him a small stone carved with symbols of healing and protection, embraced him in the fashion, pressing their foreheads together. Daniel gave the only thing he had of value. It was a small human communication device, damaged but still functional. "If you ever need help," Daniel said, "use this. I will hear you." Accepted the gift with gratitude, though his eyes showed doubt that he would ever see the human again. Daniel boarded the shuttle and watched through the window as grew smaller below him. He carried the weight of a promise in his heart, and he swore to himself that he would keep it no matter what it took. The freighter jumped to faster than light speed, and the planet of kind strangers disappeared into the darkness of space. 5 years had passed since Daniel Carter left the planet. In that time, he had changed from a simple survey pilot into a commander of the United Earth Fleet. He had earned promotions through hard work and dedication, but his thoughts often returned to the kind aliens who had saved his life. He stood now in his office aboard the military station orbiting Mars, looking at a small carved stone on his desk. Had given it to him the day he left, and he had kept it with him ever since. It reminded him of his promise. Daniel had submitted 7 requests to the Earth government asking them to establish contact with the. Each request had been. The official responses were always the same. They offered no strategic value. They had no resources worth trading. They were too far from human space to matter. Earth had limited ships and could not protect every minor species in the galaxy. Each denial made Daniel more frustrated, but he never stopped trying. Far away on, they were suffering. The pirate raids had grown worse over the 5 years since Daniel left. 3 villages had been destroyed completely, their people killed or taken as slaves. The crops burned, and the survivors fled to other settlements. In the village where Daniel had once healed, a new leader had taken control. His name was, and he was younger and harder than old. He had seen too much death to believe in hope anymore. Still lived, but barely. The old elder spent his days in bed, too weak to walk far. His body was failing, but his mind remained clear. He often spoke of the human who had crashed from the sky, the one who had promised to remember them. Listened to these stories with doubt in his heart. He had been a young farmer when Daniel visited, and he remembered the strange creature with soft pink skin and only 2 arms. But 5 years was a long time, and no help had come. Believed the human had forgotten them the moment his ship left their atmosphere. Was now the chief healer of the village. She had trained many students and saved many lives. She kept the communication device Daniel had left behind in a special box in her healing house. Sometimes at night, she would take it out and look at it, wondering if the human ever thought of them. The device had never made a sound, not once in 5 years. News came to the village that something terrible was approaching. Traders who passed through space brought warnings of a powerful criminal organization called the Syndicate. They were not simple pirates looking for easy targets. They were conquerors who took entire worlds for themselves. They had marked for conquest. They wanted the planet's fertile land and its people as workers for their mining operations on other worlds. An invasion fleet was gathering, and nothing in space could stop them. Called a meeting of all the village elders. They gathered in the central hall and discussed what could be done. Some suggested hiding in the mountains. Others spoke of trying to negotiate with them. A few even suggested fighting back, though everyone knew they had no weapons capable of resisting an invasion. No one had any real answers. They were alone in a galaxy that did not care about them. That night visited in his small house. The old elder was lying in his bed, covered with blankets against the cold. His breathing was shallow, and his eyes had grown cloudy. "They are coming," said. "We have no way to stop them." Reached out with a trembling hand and grasped his arm. "The human," he whispered. "Daniel made a promise." Shook his head. "That was 5 years ago. He is not coming back." "You must have faith," said. "I looked into his eyes when he made that promise. He meant it." Did not argue with the dying elder. He simply sat with him through the night, holding his hand as the old one's breathing grew weaker. Died before morning came. His last words were a repetition of his belief that the human would return. Buried the elder beside the field where Daniel's ship had crashed. He stood over the grave and felt only anger. Anger at the galaxy for its cruelty. Anger at himself for being unable to protect his people. And anger at the human who had made a promise he did not keep. On Earth, Daniel received intelligence reports about the Syndicate's movements. When he saw that was listed as a target, his blood ran cold. He immediately requested a meeting with his superior, Admiral Moore. The Admiral was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes. She had served in the fleet for 40 years and had seen many young officers with passionate causes. She listened as Daniel explained the situation. "I know these people," Daniel said. "They saved my life when they had nothing to gain from it. Now they are facing destruction, and we are doing nothing." Admiral Moore looked at the reports on her screen. "Commander, I understand your feelings, but Earth cannot send military forces to protect every species that faces danger. We have limited resources." "This is different," Daniel insisted. "This is about honor. This is about what kind of species we want to be." The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. "Even if I agreed with you, the decision is not mine to make. Sending a fleet to an unaligned world requires approval from the Earth Council. You would need to convince them." "Then I will convince them," Daniel said. Admiral Moore studied him carefully. "You understand that if you fail, your career may be finished. Many in the Council will see this as a waste of time." Daniel thought of, and the kindness they had shown him. He thought of the promise he had made under an orange sky. "I understand," he said, "but some things are more important than a career." Admiral Moore nodded slowly. "Then I will arrange for you to speak before the Council. But Daniel, you will only get one chance." Daniel left her office with determination burning in his chest. He would not let them face the darkness alone. The United Earth Council chamber was a massive room with seats arranged in a circle around a central platform. Representatives from every human colony and territory sat in those seats, and they all watched as Daniel Carter walked to the platform. He was wearing his dress uniform, and he carried no notes. Everything he needed to say was already in his heart. The council leader, an older man named Director Samuel Price, called for silence. "Commander Carter," he said, "you have requested time to address this council regarding military intervention on behalf of an alien species. You have 15 minutes. Please proceed." Daniel looked around at the faces watching him. Some were curious. Some were bored. A few seemed openly hostile to the idea of wasting their time on this matter. "5 years ago," he began, "my ship crashed on a planet called. I was badly injured and had no way to call for help. I expected to die alone on that world." He paused to let the words settle. "Instead, I was found by they are farmers and healers with no military power and no wealth. They had never seen a human before. They had every reason to fear me or ignore me or leave me to die. But they did none of those things. They carried me to their village, healed my wounds, fed me, and sheltered me for 3 months until rescue arrived." A woman in the front row interrupted. Her name was Helen Drake, and she was known as one of the most practical members of the council. "Commander," she said, "this is a touching story, but what does it have to do with sending Earthships into danger? We cannot deploy our military based on personal gratitude." Daniel faced her directly. "Counselor Drake, they are facing invasion by the Syndicate. You have all seen the intelligence reports. They will enslave their population and strip their world bare. They have no allies and no defenses. They will be destroyed." "And why should that concern Earth?" Drake asked. "We have threats closer to home. They offer us nothing." Daniel felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "They offer us nothing," he repeated. "You are correct. They have no valuable resources. They have no strategic position. They cannot help us in any political struggle, but that is exactly why we should help them." The council members exchanged confused glances. Daniel continued, "Every major power in this galaxy makes decisions based on what they can gain. They form alliances for profit and break them when the profit ends. They protect the strong and abandon the weak. This is why the galaxy is filled with fear and distrust. No one believes in honor anymore because no one practices it." He raised his voice slightly. "But humans can be different. We can show the galaxy that we protect those who helped us, even when there is nothing to gain. We can prove that human promises mean something. We can be the species that does the right thing simply because it is right." The chamber was silent. Daniel saw that some council members were leaning forward now, listening more carefully. Counselor Drake spoke again. "Pretty words, Commander, but words do not protect our colonies. Ships and soldiers do, and you are asking us to risk both for strangers." Daniel nodded. "Yes, I am, because those strangers risked everything for me. An old elder named made the decision to help me when his own people were afraid. A healer named treated wounds she had never seen before using medicine that might not have worked. They took a chance on a strange creature from the stars. They showed me what courage and compassion look like." He looked directly at Drake. "If we abandon them now, we prove that human gratitude is worthless. We prove that our promises are empty. And every species in this galaxy will remember that when they consider whether to trust humanity." Admiral Moore stood from her seat in the military section. "If I may address the council," she said. Director Price nodded. "Admiral, you may speak." Moore walked to stand beside Daniel. "I have served this fleet for 40 years, she said. "I have seen us make many decisions based on strategy and resources. Most of those decisions were correct. But I have also seen what happens when we ignore our principles. We become just another power grabbing for advantage in a dark galaxy." She paused. "Commander Carter is asking for a small fleet, 5 warships and 2 medical vessels. The risk is limited, but the message we send will echo across known space. Humanity keeps its promises. Humanity protects those who showed us kindness. That message may be worth more than any trade agreement or military alliance." The council debated for another hour. Some members agreed with Daniel and Moore. Others sided with Drake and called the mission a waste of resources. The arguments grew heated at times, with voices raised and accusations made. Finally, Director Price called for a vote. The council members pressed buttons on their consoles, and the results appeared on the central display. 37 in favor, 34 against. The mission was approved. Daniel felt relief wash over him, but he knew the hard part was just beginning. He had 3 weeks to assemble a fleet and reach before they arrived. Captain Vega volunteered to serve as second in command. He was a veteran officer with experience in combat operations, and Daniel was grateful for his support. Together, they selected crews for the 5 warships and 2 medical vessels that would make the journey. The fleet departed from Earth orbit on a cold morning. Daniel stood on the bridge of the lead ship, watching the blue planet shrink behind them. He thought of the waiting on their distant world, unaware that help was coming. During the journey, Daniel briefed his crews about He told them about the village and the people who lived there. He explained that they were not fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting to protect innocent beings who had shown humanity kindness. The crews listened carefully. Many of them had joined the fleet expecting routine assignments and safe careers. This mission was different. This mission had meaning. Intelligence reports arrived during the journey. The invasion fleet had already launched. 12 warships were heading for, led by a warlord named who was known for his cruelty. The humans were outnumbered more than 2 to 1. Daniel studied the reports and planned his strategy. He knew they could not win through strength alone. They would need to be clever and brave and willing to sacrifice everything. Captain Vega stood beside him on the bridge as they approached space. "Commander," he said, "do you really believe we can win this fight?" Daniel looked at the stars ahead. "I believe we have to try," he said. "That is all any of us can do." The fleet pushed forward at maximum speed, racing against time to reach before it was too late. The Earth fleet dropped out of faster-than-light speed at the edge of the system. Daniel Carter stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the display screens with a heavy heart. They were too late to prevent the invasion. They were already there. 12 warships hung in orbit above the planet, and smaller landing craft were descending toward the surface. Fires burned in several locations on the planet below, visible even from space. The invasion had begun. "Commander," Captain Vega said from the tactical station, "the fleet has detected us. They are moving to intercept." Daniel studied the enemy formation. The ships were larger and more heavily armed than his own. Their warlord commanded from a massive flagship at the center of the formation. By any reasonable measure, the humans should retreat and save themselves. Daniel had no intention of retreating. "Open a communication channel," he ordered. "Broadcast on all frequencies." The communication officer nodded. "Channel open, Commander." Daniel spoke clearly and firmly. "This is Commander Daniel Carter of the United Earth Fleet. The planet and its people are under the protection of humanity. Any attack on this world is an attack on Earth. Withdraw your forces immediately or face the consequences." There was a long pause before a response came. The face that appeared on the screen was reptilian, with dark scales and yellow eyes filled with amusement. The warlord smiled in a way that showed too many teeth. "Human," he said, "you bring 7 ships against my 12. You are either very brave or very stupid. I suspect the second. This world belongs to the now. Leave while you still can." Daniel did not look away from the screen. "I made a promise to the people of this world. I intend to keep it." Laughed, "Then you will die keeping it. I will enjoy watching your ships burn." The transmission ended. Daniel turned to his crew. "All ships battle stations. We fight until they retreat or we can fight no longer." On the surface of, they were hiding in shelters and caves. Soldiers had already landed near several villages, and the sounds of destruction filled the air. Had organized the evacuation of his village, leading the people into the hills where they might survive a little longer. Had refused to leave the healing house. She stayed behind to help the wounded who could not be moved. When the sky began to flash with lights from the battle above, she looked up through the window and wondered what was happening. Then she remembered the communication device. She ran to the box where she kept it and pressed the activation button. For 5 years, the device had been silent. Now a small light began to blink. "Hello," she said in the human language Daniel had taught her. "Can anyone hear me? Please help us." A voice came through the device, crackling but clear. "This is Daniel, I am here. Help has arrived." Felt tears running down her face. She ran outside and shouted to the villagers still nearby. "The human has come back. He kept his promise." In orbit, the battle had begun. The fleet advanced in a wide formation, firing weapons that lit up the darkness of space. The human ships spread out and returned fire, their smaller guns doing what damage they could against the larger enemy vessels. 2 human ships were destroyed in the first exchange. Daniel watched the explosions and felt the weight of every life lost, but he could not stop now. Too much depended on this fight. "Captain Vega," he ordered, "take your squadron and target the enemy flagship. If we can disable ship, their formation will break." Vega nodded and led 3 ships in a direct assault on the command vessel. The enemy fire was intense, and one of Vega's ships took heavy damage, but they pressed forward, using speed and maneuverability to avoid the worst of the attacks. Vega's ship launched a full spread of missiles at the flagship's weapon systems. Several found their targets, and explosions erupted along the enemy hull. The flagship's main guns went silent. Roared in anger and ordered his remaining ships to concentrate fire on the humans, but the damage to his flagship had disrupted his control over the fleet. The formation began to fall apart as individual captains made their own decisions. Daniel saw the opportunity. All ships he commanded attack now while they are disorganized. The human fleet surged forward. They were still outnumbered, but they fought with a determination that surprised them. Every human ship crew knew what they were fighting for. They were not fighting for territory or profit. They were fighting for the kind farmers below who had saved one of their own. Another human ship was destroyed, then another, but they were taking losses too. 3 of their warships were crippled and drifting. 2 more had been destroyed outright. On the surface, watched the battle through a telescope he had taken from the village. He saw human ships fighting against impossible odds. He saw explosions and debris, and he understood at last that the stories had told were true. The human had come back. He had brought warriors to fight for people he barely knew. He had kept a promise made 5 years ago to a dying elder who never stopped believing. Fell to his knees and wept. In space, looked at the damage reports from his fleet. Half his ships were disabled or destroyed. His flagship was crippled. The humans had lost most of their fleet too, but the survivors were still fighting. They showed no signs of surrender. "This is madness," his second-in-command said. "They will not stop." Stared at the display showing the remaining human ships. "Why do they fight so hard for this worthless planet?" "Because they are human," the second-in-command replied. Perhaps that is explanation enough. Made a decision he had never made before. He ordered a retreat. The surviving ships turned and accelerated away from. The landing craft on the surface received orders to withdraw. Within an hour, the invasion force had fled the system entirely. Daniel stood on his bridge, surrounded by exhausted crew members. Of the 7 ships he had brought, only 3 remained operational. The cost had been terrible, but was safe. "Commander," the communication officer said, "we are receiving transmissions from the surface. They are asking to speak with you." Daniel felt tears in his eyes, put them through. His face appeared on the screen, her large dark eyes filled with emotion. "You came back," she said. "You kept your promise." Daniel nodded slowly. "I told you I would not forget." On the planet below, they emerged from their hiding places. They looked up at the sky where human ships orbited their world. For the first time in their history, they were not alone. 1 week had passed since the Battle of. The surviving human ships remained in orbit above the planet while repairs were conducted and the wounded received treatment. Medical teams had descended to the surface to help the who had been injured during the brief ground invasion. Daniel Carter finally had time to do what he had wanted to do since he arrived. He took a shuttle down to the planet and landed in the same field where his survey ship had crashed 5 years before. The scar in the land was still visible, though grass and flowers had grown over most of it. A crowd waited for him when he stepped out of the shuttle. They stood in silence, their large dark eyes watching him with expressions he could not easily read. Then, as one, they bowed their heads in a gesture of deep respect. Daniel walked through the crowd toward a familiar figure, stood near the edge of the gathering, older now than when he had left, but still carrying herself with the quiet dignity he remembered. She stepped forward and embraced him in the human way, wrapping her 4 arms around him. "You came back," she said softly. "I never truly doubted, but part of me was afraid." Daniel held her gently. "I am sorry it took so long," he said. "I tried many times to convince my people to help. They only agreed when it was almost too late." Stepped back and looked at him. "Many of your people died fighting for us. We do not know how to repay such a sacrifice." "You already paid for it," Daniel said. 5 years ago, when you healed a stranger who fell from the sky." Another figure approached, walked slowly toward Daniel, his face showing emotions that were clearly difficult for him. He stopped a few steps away and stood in silence for a long moment. "I did not believe," finally said. "I thought was a fool for trusting your promise. I thought you had forgotten us the moment you left. I was wrong about everything." Daniel shook his head. "You were not wrong to doubt. In your position I might have doubted too, but understood something important. He understood that some promises are sacred." Lowered his head, "Died believing you would come. His last words were about you. I wish he could have lived to see this day." Daniel felt a pain in his chest. He asked to take him to where was buried. They walked together across the field to a small hill where a simple stone marked the grave. Daniel knelt before it and placed his hand on the earth. "I kept my promise, old friend," he said quietly. "I only wish I could have been faster." He stayed there for a long time, remembering the kindness of the elder who had taken a risk on a wounded stranger. In the days that followed, word of the battle of spread across the galaxy. Traders and travelers carried the story from system to system. Many species were shocked by what they heard. A human fleet had crossed vast distances to defend a minor world with no strategic value. They had fought against superior numbers and suffered terrible losses. And they had done it simply because they had once helped a single human. The Galactic Observation Council sent a representative to investigate. Her name was Ambassador Lyra, and she belonged to a species called the who had monitored galactic politics for thousands of years. She arrived at aboard a diplomatic vessel and requested to speak with the human commander. Daniel met her in the village center. She was tall and elegant, with silver skin and eyes that seemed to see through everything. She studied him carefully before speaking. "Commander Carter," she said, "I have lived for 300 years and observed countless conflicts. Never have I seen a power expend so much for so little gain. I must understand your reasoning." Daniel considered his response. "Ambassador, they saved my life when I had nothing to offer them. They did not ask about my value or importance. They simply helped me because I needed help. When they faced destruction, I could not stand by and do nothing." Tilted her head, "But the cost was enormous, ships destroyed, lives lost, resources spent, all for a species that cannot repay you." Daniel smiled slightly. "You are thinking like every other power in this galaxy. You calculate value based on what can be gained. But humans measure value differently. We believe that kindness deserves kindness in return. We believe that promises must be kept even when keeping them is difficult. We believe that protecting the innocent is more important than any profit." The ambassador was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke again. If this is truly how humans think, then you are either the most foolish species I have encountered or the most remarkable, perhaps both. She returned to her ship and filed a report with the Observation Council. Her report stated that humanity was a species to be watched carefully, not because they were a threat, but because they might change the nature of galactic politics entirely. The Earth government sent Admiral Mortu to formalize relations with the. She brought documents offering a protection treaty and an alliance between their species. The terms were generous. Earth asked for nothing except friendship. Signed the treaty on behalf of his people. As he pressed his mark to the document, he looked at Daniel standing nearby. "We do not deserve this," he said. "Yes, you do," Daniel replied. "You showed kindness to a stranger when you had every reason to turn away. That is exactly the kind of species that deserves friends." The ceremony was broadcast across human space and beyond. Other minor species saw what Earth had done for them. They saw a great power keeping its word and protecting the weak. Many of them began sending messages to Earth, asking if humanity would extend the same friendship to them. Admiral Moore spoke at the closing ceremony. "What happened here," she said, "was not a military victory in the traditional sense. We lost more ships than we destroyed. We spent resources we could not spare. By the cold calculations of galactic politics, we lost." She paused and looked at the gathered before her. "But by every measure that truly matters, we won. We proved that human promises are not empty words. We proved that kindness shown to us will be returned 1,000 times over. And we proved that in a dark and dangerous galaxy, there is at least one species willing to stand up for what is right." They cheered in their soft, clicking way. The humans in attendance applauded. Daniel stayed on after the ceremony. He had been offered a promotion and a command back on Earth, but he had refused. Instead, he requested to serve as Earth's first ambassador to the people. The request was granted. He moved into a small house near the village where he had once healed. Every day, he walked through the fields and visited with the who had become like family to him. He helped them rebuild what they had destroyed. He taught their young ones about human history and learned more about traditions. One evening, he walked to his grave and sat down beside it. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "I kept my promise," he said to the silent stone, "and now I am home." In the years that followed, the alliance between humans and grew stronger. Other species joined as well, drawn by the reputation humanity had earned at. They called themselves the Covenant of Kindness, and they stood together against those who would prey upon the weak. And it all began because one elderly alien decided to help a stranger who fell from the sky.